at 2 o'clock in the morning in March of 1953, in a hotel on an island still called Ceylon. The most celebrated actress in the English-speaking world stood in the middle of her room, entirely naked, and screamed. Not words. Sounds that belonged to no language anyone present had ever heard. The air was thick, close to 40 degrees, and the smell of frangipani drifted through the open shutters alongside something else, something rotten, vegetal, sweet in the way that decay is sweet. The film crew of Elephant Walk had been asleep for hours. The tropical night had swallowed every noise except the cicadas and the distant thrum of a generator. Then came the scream from room 14, and the cicadas stopped. She had been undressing, not seductively. Mechanically, as though her clothes were on fire, and only she could feel the flames. Her husband, Laurence Olivier, the greatest actor in Britain, perhaps the greatest in the world, sat on the edge of the bed and watched her with the expression of a man who has seen this before and knows that nothing he says will make any difference. She had just told him, in vivid and deliberate detail, that she had been sleeping with Peter Finch, his protégé, his discovery. The young Australian actor he had personally brought to England, championed, and welcomed into their home. She told him this not with shame. She told him with something closer to triumph. Behind the wall, Finch could hear every word. He did not come out. He raised his hand to the door twice, according to a story he would later tell with great reluctance. Twice he lowered it. He did not know whom he wanted to help, her or himself. In the end, he helped no one. A doctor was called. A sedative was administered. She slept for 3 hours. When she woke, she looked at the faces around her with mild curiosity, as though she had arrived at a party she did not remember being invited to. She asked why everyone seemed so upset. She remembered nothing, not a single word. What was this? Madness, revenge, cruelty, or the only moment of unvarnished truth in a life constructed entirely from reflections, a life in which the woman and the performance had become so entangled that no one, least of all Vivien Leigh herself, could tell where one ended and the other began. To answer that question, one must go back 40 years, to a city above the clouds, where a girl with green eyes first heard the sound of applause and decided, with the terrifying certainty that only children possess, that she would be great. Not beautiful, great. She did not yet know that the distance between those two words would cost her everything she had. On the 5th of November, 1913, in the hill station of Darjeeling, a city at 7,000 feet, perched between sky and abyss, a girl was born to Ernest Richard Hartley and Gertrude Mary Frances Yacht. They named her Vivien Mary Hartley. Ernest was a broker, a quiet, competent Englishman of the sort the Empire produced in great numbers and rewarded with modest comfort. Gertrude was something else entirely. She had Irish and French blood, and there were persistent rumors, never confirmed but never quite dispelled, of Parsi and Armenian ancestry somewhere in the family line. Biographers would later point to this mixed heritage as the source of the extraordinary, faintly exotic quality of her daughter's face, the face that would one day stop traffic on 2 continents and drive at least 3 men to varying degrees of despair. At 3 years old, she gave her first performance. Gertrude, who had a passion for amateur theatricals, stood her daughter before an audience of colonial wives in the drawing room of a Darjeeling club and instructed her to recite Little Bo Peep. The child did not merely recite. She performed. She held the room. Gertrude saw it and understood, with the instinct of a woman who had always wanted the stage for herself, that something unusual was happening. Her daughter was not shy. Her daughter was not nervous. Her daughter was, at 3 years of age, entirely at home in front of strangers in a way that she would never quite be at home anywhere else. Before those early performances, Gertrude would issue instructions with the precision of a stage director. You will recite poetry for the guests. Stand straight. Do not smile until you have finished. It was not warmth. It was direction. And Vivien, who would spend the rest of her life searching for both, learned early to accept the second in place of the first. When the girl was 6 or 7, Gertrude made a different kind of decision, one that carried no applause. She sent her daughter away. First to a convent in Darjeeling, then to the convent of the Sacred Heart at Roehampton in England, and after that to schools across France, Italy, and Bavaria. It was the custom of the age, the way that families of a certain class prepared their daughters for a certain kind of life. But for the child, it was a severance, the first loss, the first role she ever had to play off stage, the girl who does not cry. The day Gertrude put her on the train, she did not embrace her. She adjusted her collar, checked her luggage, and stepped back. The child watched through the window as the platform receded. She did not cry. She was already performing. At Roehampton, and later in the convent schools scattered across Europe, the girl received an education that would serve her in ways the nuns could never have anticipated. She learned deportment, the straight back, the measured walk, the ability to enter a room as though she owned it. She learned French and Italian to the point of fluency. She learned discipline, the fierce and unforgiving kind that Catholic institutions of the 1920s dispensed alongside scripture and embroidery. And she learned guilt. The nuns taught her that beauty was a trial, not a gift, that a pretty face was God's way of testing whether a soul could resist vanity. Vivien absorbed this lesson so thoroughly that it became the central contradiction of her life. Her appearance was both a weapon and a cage, and she would spend decades trying to force the world to see past both. Her closest friend at the convent was a girl called Maureen O'Sullivan, the same Maureen O'Sullivan who would later become Jane to Johnny Weissmuller's Tarzan, and who would, in time, become the mother of Mia Farrow. The two girls made a pact. Both would become actresses. Both kept their word. It is one of those small, improbable facts that biography occasionally offers up, as though to remind us that the future is sometimes decided in whispered conversations between children in dormitories after lights out. Gertrude, for all her severity, gave her daughter one gift that mattered more than deportment or languages. She gave her books. Hans Christian Andersen, Lewis Carroll, Rudyard Kipling, the Greek myths. Vivien read voraciously, indiscriminately, with a hunger that never diminished. And she discovered, somewhere in those years of reading, that she possessed a memory of almost frightening precision. She could absorb a page of text at a single reading and reproduce it days later without error. It was a superpower. It was also, in time, a curse. She would remember everything, every slight, every review, every unkind word spoken about her talent. Everything except what she did during the episodes that had no name yet, the episodes that would not be given a name for decades. At 14, standing before a mirror in a corridor of the convent school in France, Vivien Hartley confronted for the first time the thing that would define and torment her. Boys on the streets of Paris turned to stare. The nuns pursed their lips. The other girls watched her with that particular mixture of admiration and resentment that beauty provokes in the young. She wrote in her diary, a passage later cited by the biographer Anne Edwards, that she wished people would value her for her mind, not her face. She was 14. She already understood. She did not yet understand that there would be no escape. In 1931, she returned to England and enrolled at the Royal Academy of Dramatic Art. She stayed only a few terms. The admissions panel, in their notes on her audition, wrote a sentence that she kept for the rest of her life and showed to anyone who complimented her looks. Beautiful to the point of absurdity. Let us see whether she can act. She found this hilarious. She also found it enraging. It was the first official record of the judgment that would follow her like a shadow for 3 decades. The suspicion that behind the perfect face there might be nothing at all. She left the academy not because she had failed, but because she had met, at a dinner party in London, a man 13 years her senior who offered her a different kind of certainty. On the 20th of December, 1932, Vivien Hartley married Herbert Lee Homan. He was a barrister, handsome in a solid English way, reliable, conventional, and deeply in love with a woman he did not remotely understand. He wanted a wife who would manage his household, raise his children, and attend dinners at which she would charm his colleagues with exactly the right degree of warmth. He did not want an actress. He made this clear before the wedding. She agreed to his terms. She broke them almost immediately. On the 12th of October, 1933, their daughter Suzanne was born. Vivien loved the child. She did not love motherhood. This is a statement of fact, not a judgment. Every day spent at home was a day spent away from the stage, and for a woman whose entire sense of self was bound up in performance, domesticity felt less like contentment than like suffocation. Within weeks of giving birth, she was leaving the baby with the nanny and travelling across London to auditions. Herbert was appalled. His mother was more so. Neither of them could stop her. There is an image that captures this period better than any analysis. Evening. Herbert returns from chambers. The house is quiet. The nanny is upstairs with Suzanne. Vivien is not home. On the kitchen table a note. At an audition. Supper is in the oven. He sits down to eat alone. The baby sleeps. This scene repeated itself for weeks, then months. He did not yet understand that he was watching the early stages of a departure that would take 7 years to complete, but was already in its essentials finished. She adopted a stage name. Vivien became Vivien, the French spelling, more elegant, more distinctive. She took her husband's middle name for a surname, Leigh, Vivien Leigh. It looked right on a program. It sounded right in a theatre. It was the name of someone who intended to be remembered. In 1935, after a performance in a play called The Mask of Virtue, she was spotted by the Hungarian-born producer Alexander Korda, who signed her to a contract with London Films. Korda was a shrewd judge of talent, but he had no idea what to do with his new acquisition. She was, he complained to colleagues, too beautiful for serious roles and too serious for the roles that suited beautiful women. For several months, she sat on a salary with nothing to film, and she seethed. Contemporaries described her as possessing a cold, aristocratic dazzle until she opened her mouth. Then you discovered an intelligence that could cut through any conversation like a blade. The beauty drew people in. The mind, more often than not, frightened them away. The reviews of her early film work were unanimous in their ambivalence. Charming, but The word but followed her like a stray dog for the better part of a decade. Charming but shallow, lovely but lightweight, a face for the ages, a talent for the moment. She collected these notices. She read them at night, alone, and they cut her in ways that no one around her fully appreciated. She had seen Laurence Olivier on stage before she ever met him, a magnetic figure, not conventionally handsome, but possessed of a force that made handsomeness irrelevant. When they were formally introduced at a dinner party in 1936, she already knew. He did not yet. She turned to a friend after seeing him perform and said, with a calm that was more unsettling than any display of passion, "That is the man I am going to marry." The friend pointed out that she was already married, and that Olivier was married too, to the actress Jill Esmond, with whom he had a young son. Vivien's reply, recorded in Olivier's own memoirs and confirmed by Edwards, consisted of 4 words that would detonate 2 marriages, displace 2 children, and set in motion a love affair of such intensity that it would burn for 20 years before consuming everything it touched. That is of no consequence. 4 words. They launched a chain reaction. 2 marriages destroyed, 2 children who would grow up without a daily parent, 1 genius broken by love, and a fire, a literal one, in which Scarlett O'Hara would be born. The affair that began on the set of Fire over England in 1937 burned through 2 marriages within 3 years. But before the destruction came, Homan wrote her a letter, cited by Edwards, that contained a sentence of quiet, terrible prescience. "I cannot compete with a genius, but remember, geniuses burn those who stand beside them." The asymmetry of their appearance troubled them both, though neither spoke of it openly. Olivier was magnetic, a face built for the stage, all angles and intensity, but not, by any conventional measure, handsome. She was objectively, almost absurdly, lovelier. This imbalance gnawed at him. He feared she had fallen for the actor rather than the man. She feared he saw only the face and not the mind behind it. They were both wrong and both right, and this mutual misreading would poison the well of their marriage long before the illness did. The press knew too. By 1938, the affair was no longer a secret but a scandal. Newspapers on both sides of the Atlantic accused the couple of immorality, 2 married people who had abandoned their families. "Stars frolic in Hollywood while London burns," ran one headline, and though it was unfair, they would return to Britain and contribute to the war effort. The damage to their reputations was done. Vivien, who cared more about public opinion than she ever admitted, felt the sting. Olivier, who cared less, shrugged it off. This difference in sensitivity would matter later. Before she left for Hollywood, she said something to Olivier over breakfast, as though remarking on the weather. "You won't play Rhett, but I shall play Scarlett. Wait and see." He laughed. She did not. The search for Scarlett O'Hara had consumed Hollywood for 2 years. David O. Selznick had tested virtually every actress in America. Vivien Leigh was unknown in the United States, a minor English player with a handful of forgettable films. She had, however, an unshakable conviction that the part was hers. She told a journalist, with the serene confidence of a woman who has confused determination with destiny, "I've cast myself as Scarlett O'Hara." The legend of how she got the role has acquired the smooth, polished quality of myth. In December of 1938, Selznick was filming the burning of Atlanta on the back lot. old sets doused in kerosene and set ablaze for the cameras. His brother Myron, a talent agent, brought Vivien to the set that night. As the flames roared, Myron tapped his brother on the shoulder and said, "David, I'd like you to meet your Scarlet." It is a magnificent story. It may even be substantially true, though the film historian Ruddy Bailmer has suggested the meeting was less spontaneous than it appeared, that Myron had been maneuvering for days. Whether serendipity or stagecraft, the result was the same. Selznick looked at the young Englishwoman, lit from behind by the burning of a plywood Atlanta, and saw what he had been searching for. The screen tests followed, grueling, exhaustive, spread across December and January. She learned a Southern American accent in a fortnight, working 6 hours a day with a dialect coach, her extraordinary memory absorbing vowel shifts and cadences with the same ease it had once absorbed convent poetry. She was not the most experienced finalist. She was not the most famous. She was, by a considerable margin, the most scarlet. What followed was 125 days of something that resembled filmmaking the way trench warfare resembles a disagreement. 16 hours a day, 6 days a week. Corsets that left bruises on her ribs. Temperatures that turned the soundstages into ovens. 4 packets of cigarettes a day, the only mechanism she had for managing the stress, and one that would, in time, destroy her lungs. 3 directors came and went, fired, broken, replaced. Vivien, who had bonded with the first of them, George Cukor, secretly visited him in the evenings for guidance after his dismissal. She trusted her own instincts more than any director's. Clark Gable ate garlic before their kissing scenes. Whether this was deliberate sabotage or genuine dietary preference remains a matter of debate. Vivien confided to Olivia de Havilland, her co-star and ally, "Kissing Clark is like kissing an ashtray stuffed with garlic." Gable, when confronted, was unperturbed. "It's for the voice, darling," he said, and went on eating garlic. In the breaks between takes, she joked about her own deterioration. Lighting yet another cigarette, she remarked to a crew member, "Scarlett would approve." She never knew when to stop either. The ability to laugh at the hell she was living through was the thing that held the entire production together. When the leading lady could joke about the inferno, the rest of the company found it harder to complain. Noel Coward, who knew both Vivien and Olivier intimately, observed that she could defuse tension on any set with a single remark, and in the next breath propose a solution to a scene that the director had been struggling with for a week. "She thought faster than anyone in the room," he said. "The trouble was that the room never noticed, too distracted by the face." Olivier was far away, filming Wuthering Heights. They wrote to each other daily, letters of passion, longing, and professional jealousy that would have made remarkable reading had they survived intact. The premiere took place on the 15th of December, 1939, in Atlanta. Vivien Leigh became a global star in a single evening. The scale of the transformation was almost violent. One day she was a promising English actress with a modest following. The next, she was the most famous woman in the world. The first Academy Award came on the 29th of February, 1940. She accepted it with grace and a smile that concealed a complicated truth. The world had fallen in love with her face. The Oscar was recognition, but not the kind she craved. She had wanted the world to honor her craft. The world honored her cheekbones. Her divorce from Homan was finalized in February of that year. He was granted custody of Suzanne, but allowed Vivien to visit. They remained in contact, not friends exactly, but two people who respected a shared past. The wedding took place on the 31st of August, 1940, in Santa Barbara, California. The witnesses were Katharine Hepburn and Garson Kanin. It was a small ceremony, almost furtive, as though both bride and groom sensed that what they were doing was less a beginning than a continuation of something that had already been in motion for 3 years and could not be stopped. On the morning of the wedding, she telephoned Homan. She thanked him for letting her go without hatred. He hung up the telephone. Suzanne, 7 years old, remained with her father in London. It was a quiet tragedy, the kind that makes no headlines and leaves no visible scars, but reshapes a child's understanding of the world in ways that take decades to surface. Vivien loved her daughter. She could not be both a mother and an actress, and she had chosen. The choice was not made cruelly. It was made inevitably, the way a river chooses the sea. August of 1940. The world was burning, the Blitz had begun, and London was learning to sleep underground. And in a small church in California, two of the greatest theatrical talents Britain had ever produced promised each other eternity. They did not know that eternity would last 20 years, and that the first crack would appear sooner than the ink on the marriage certificate had time to dry. They returned to Britain. Vivien performed for wounded soldiers in basement shelters during the bombing raids. On one occasion, a piece of shrapnel struck the wall 3 meters from where she stood. She did not interrupt her monologue. The soldiers applauded standing. It was the kind of courage that looks like recklessness from the outside, but is in fact something closer to compulsion, the inability to stop performing, even when the ceiling is falling in. In 1940, they mounted a production of Romeo and Juliet on Broadway. It opened on the 9th of May. It closed after 36 performances. The reviews were savage. Her voice, the critics said, was that of a shopgirl. She was too lovely for Juliet, a complaint that would have been comic had it not been so wounding. Olivier absorbed the blow with the stoicism of a man accustomed to theatrical failure. Vivien did not. She wrote in her diary, "They see only the skin, never the bones." The first signs of the illness appeared earlier than most accounts suggest. In 1937, the same year the affair with Olivier began, she was rehearsing the role of Ophelia in a production of Hamlet. During the mad scene, Vivien produced a scream that was not in the text. It was not a dramatic choice. The director stopped the rehearsal. She stood on the stage and looked at the faces around her with genuine confusion, as though she had been woken from a dream she could not remember entering. Within a minute, she was herself again, composed, professional, apologetic. They attributed it to nerves. It was not nerves. Between 1942 and 1943, the episodes became more frequent, though they still had no name. Periods of extraordinary energy, 20 hours of work without rest, rapid speech, laughter that went on too long, a sexual charge that electrified every room she entered, would give way, without warning, to stretches of black depression in which she could not rise from bed, could not speak, could not bear the sound of her own name. No one understood what they were witnessing. In the 1940s, the condition that would later be called bipolar disorder was not widely diagnosed. Its symptoms were attributed to temperament, to artistic excess, to the vague and unhelpful category of nerves. Olivier was the first to see it clearly. In his memoirs, he described what he witnessed with the precision of a man who has had 4 decades to find the words. Before me stood not a person but something that had taken possession of my wife, a vicious, evil-seeming monster. And then, an hour later, her again, gentle, frightened, remembering nothing. In 1944, during the filming of Caesar and Cleopatra, the thing that had been gathering in the shadows finally stepped into the light. Vivien was pregnant, a longed-for child, Olivier's child, the baby that was supposed to anchor their marriage to something beyond the stage. She fell during production. The circumstances remain disputed. The result does not. She lost the baby. What followed was the first severe breakdown. Olivier was at the hospital. He held her hand. She opened her eyes and looked at him, and there was nothing in her gaze. No recognition, no warmth, no fear. She looked at him the way one looks at a stranger on a railway platform. 1 second, 2. Then something shifted behind her eyes, and she knew him. She began to cry. Not from the grief of losing the child, though that grief was real and would never fully leave her. She cried from the shame of not having recognized the man she loved. This was worse than the miscarriage. This was the moment when both of them understood that something was happening inside her mind, something that could not be explained by exhaustion or sorrow or the pressures of a wartime career. The diagnosis of chronic tuberculosis came around the same time, the mid-1940s. It was kept from the press. The conjunction was devastating. Tuberculosis weakening the body, cigarettes destroying the lungs, stress corroding the nerves, and beneath it all, the unnamed disorder cycling through its phases with the indifference of weather. In 1948, Olivier and Vivien embarked on a theatrical tour of Australia and New Zealand with the Old Vic Company. It was meant to be a triumph, the golden couple of the English stage, bringing Shakespeare to the colonies. In Christchurch, it became a disaster. The argument began over a trivial matter, a missed cue, a costume change, the kind of backstage friction that normally dissolves before it reaches the stage. This time it did not dissolve. Olivier, exhausted and frightened by what he was seeing in her, struck her across the face. She struck him back. She refused to go on stage. The company stood in the wings and pretended not to have heard. It was during this tour that Olivier encountered a young Australian actor of raw talent and rough charm. His name was Peter Finch. Olivier was impressed. He offered to bring Finch to England, to sponsor his career, to open the doors of the London theatre to him. It was an act of genuine generosity. It was also, though Olivier could not have known it, an act of extraordinary self-destruction. He was bringing into his home the man who would sleep with his wife. Another woman might have stopped, might have rested, might have listened to the doctors who told her that her body was failing and her mind was under siege. Vivien Leigh did the opposite. She took the role of a woman losing her sanity and played it so convincingly that the world gave her a second gold statue for the performance. The world did not know that she was not entirely acting. Tennessee Williams wrote a streetcar named Desire in 1947. Blanche Du Bois, the fading Southern belle who clings to illusion as the world strips her of everything she has, was, in Williams's own estimation, the finest female role he ever created. When the play opened in London on the 11th of October, 1949, with Olivier directing and Vivien in the lead, Williams travelled from New York to see it. He watched from the stalls. Afterwards, he sought out Olivier backstage and said something that Olivier would remember with a chill for the rest of his life. "Your wife does not play Blanche. She is Blanche. It is genius, and it frightens me." Olivier understood the compliment. He also understood the warning. The role required Vivien to inhabit a woman whose grip on reality was loosening night after night, performance after performance. For an actress whose own grip on reality was becoming uncertain, it was either the bravest artistic choice imaginable or the most dangerous. He would later admit that he should never have allowed her to take the part. But she was too good. She was always too good for the roles that were worst for her. The film came in 1951, directed by Elia Kazan. Her co-star was a young actor from Nebraska named Marlon Brando, 27 years old, and already in the process of dismantling everything the American theater thought it knew about acting. The collision between them was electric and deeply uncomfortable. She was classical British training, control, precision, every gesture calibrated. He was the method, raw, improvisational, deliberately chaotic. They disliked each other's approach with an intensity that bordered on contempt. On screen, this mutual antagonism produced something extraordinary. Stanley Kowalski and Blanche DuBois were supposed to destroy each other. Brando and Leigh very nearly did. Brando would later say of her that she had no off switch. She could not stop performing, even over lunch, even in the corridor between takes. He said it with irritation, but beneath the irritation there was something that sounded very much like respect. Kazan saw what was happening. He saw that Vivien was drawing on something deeper than technique, that the tremor in Blanche's voice was not entirely manufactured, that the desperation in her eyes was not entirely acted. He made a choice that biographers have debated ever since. He used it. He pushed her further into the character, knowing that the result would be extraordinary and the cost might be severe. There is a moment, reconstructed from Kazan's own writings, though he never pinpointed the exact scene, when he called "cut," and she did not stop. Blanche continued speaking, the monologue spilling out in a voice that was no longer quite Vivien's, something that belonged to a place between the actress and the role. Brando stepped back. The crew fell silent. Kazan did not turn off the camera. The take made it into the film. The second Academy Award was presented on the 20th of March, 1952. 2 Oscars. 2 women who lose everything. Scarlett loses love. Blanche loses her mind. The symmetry was too perfect to be comfortable. She held the statuette and said, quietly, to no one in particular, "They gave me an Oscar for madness. What does that say about me?" Olivier, standing beside her, did not find an answer. 2 golden figures now stood on the mantelpiece of their home, and beyond the front door, a man was already walking the corridors of their life. A man Olivier had brought to England himself, championed and trusted. Australian by upbringing, born in London, raised in Sydney, Peter Finch possessed the kind of rough, physical charisma that the English theatre of the period did not quite know how to accommodate. Talented, ambitious, and by all accounts extraordinarily attractive to women, he entered the Olivier's circle like a match entering a room full of gas. What began in Australia in '48 had, by the time the company reached Ceylon 5 years later, become a crisis that could no longer be contained. During her manic phases, Vivien was incandescent, brilliant, seductive, impossible to resist. Finch was drawn to this version of her the way a moth is drawn to a lamp. He was not drawn to what came after. When the darkness arrived, the silence, the violence, the blank stare of a woman who did not recognize her own reflection, he retreated. He wanted the angel. He could not endure the alternative. In London, the affair was conducted with a recklessness that suggested either supreme confidence or supreme indifference to consequences. Finch was performing in Olivier's productions. He was a guest in Olivier's home. He was sleeping with Olivier's wife. The great actor suspected. He said nothing. Whether this silence was dignity, denial, or simply the exhaustion of a man fighting too many battles at once, no biographer has been able to determine. Finch's wife, Tamara, knew as well. One biographer suggests she attempted to confront Vivien and received glacial silence in return. Another claims the Finch marriage was already a formality by that point. Neither account is fully documented. What is certain is that by 1953, the triangle had reached a pressure that demanded release. The first 2 weeks on location in Ceylon were extraordinary. Vivien did not sleep. She did not need to, or so it seemed. She was in the grip of a manic episode of unusual intensity, and the mania made her electric. She worked overtime, charmed the crew, dazzled the director William Dietel. The heat was murderous, 38 degrees, 90% humidity, but she appeared immune to it, as though the fire inside her was burning hotter than anything the tropics could produce. By the third week, the cracks were visible. She began confusing her lines, with her legendary memory. She shouted at the makeup artists over imagined slights. She swung from euphoria to rage and back again within the space of an hour. The crew exchanged glances. Dietel spoke to the producers. The producers telephoned Olivier. Then came the night that opened this story, the night in room 14. Now, with the full weight of context behind it, the scene acquires a different gravity. This was not a woman throwing a tantrum. This was a human being in the grip of a neurological catastrophe, her brain chemistry in freefall, her inhibitions dissolved, her capacity for judgment obliterated. She told Olivier about Finch not because she wanted to hurt him, though it hurt him profoundly, but because the illness had stripped away every filter, every social mechanism, every carefully maintained wall between thought and speech. What came out was raw, unprocessed truth, delivered with the manic conviction that truth, however brutal, is always preferable to silence. Olivier sat on the bed and listened. He did not shout. He did not weep. He sat with the stillness of a man who has been expecting a blow and has finally received it. A doctor was summoned. He examined her briefly and spoke to Olivier in the corridor with the bluntness that colonial physicians of the era tended to favor. "Mr. Olivier, your wife does not need rest. She needs a clinic." In his memoirs, published decades later, Olivier would write of that night. "I understood then that I had lost her not to Finch, but to something neither of us could fight." Behind the wall, Finch heard everything. He did not enter the room. By morning, he had left the island without saying goodbye. The affair, in all its essential respects, was over. He would go on to become one of the finest actors of his generation. He would rarely speak of Vivien. When he did, it was briefly and with the guarded tone of a man who knows he behaved neither well nor badly, but simply inadequately, which is sometimes worse than either. Olivier flew her back to London. She was admitted to Netherne Hospital in Surrey, a psychiatric institution. The treatment was electroconvulsive therapy, the standard of the 1950s, electrodes on the temples, a rubber guard between the teeth, A current passed through the brain. After the sessions, she was quiet, docile. The spark was gone. She moved through the hospital corridors like a child who has been scolded and does not understand why. Within weeks, the spark returned. She was herself again, brilliant, warm, fragile, and already on the threshold of the next collapse. Her role in Elephant Walk was given to Elizabeth Taylor, who was 21 years old and ascending. Some of Vivien's close-up footage could not be reshot and remained in the finished film, a ghostly palimpsest, one face layered beneath another. If you watch carefully, you can see her in certain frames. The green eyes, the perfect bones, the expression of a woman who does not yet know she is about to disappear. The years that followed passed in the way that years pass when you are ill, not quickly, not slowly, but unevenly, some weeks stretched thin as wire and others compressed into a single grey afternoon. The world, which had been watching, looked away. The 50s did not discuss such things. There were newer faces, younger scandals, fresher tragedies to consume. Behind the closed doors of Notley Abbey, the Olivier's country house, something was dying. It died quietly, which made it worse. Bipolar disorder is not a bad mood. It is not a difficult personality. It is a chemical war inside the brain, in which two armies alternate without ceasefire or negotiation. In the manic phase, a person becomes a god, sleepless, dazzling, creative, seductive, unstoppable. In the depressive phase, the same person becomes ash, unable to rise, unable to speak, unable to want to live. Between the phases, the person is themselves, normal, intelligent, terrified, knowing that the next wave will come and that they will once again become someone they do not recognize. In the 1950s, there was no lithium, no mood stabilizers, no cognitive behavioral therapy. There was electroshock and the advice to rest. She fought a disease for which the weapons had not yet been invented. She lost not because she was weak, but because the battle was impossible. The tabloids of the era inflated a myth of countless lovers and reckless promiscuity. Biographers who examined the evidence found something different. Beyond Finch, there were no confirmed names. The heightened libido of the manic phase, a clinical symptom, not a moral failing, was seized upon by gossip columnists and transformed into scandal. Strachan, in his biography, called the newspaper stories what they were: sensation built on someone else's suffering. In 1953, she performed in Rattigan's The Sleeping Prince alongside Olivier, a light comedy designed to restore the image of the happy couple. The audience believed it. The press believed it. They no longer did. Olivier had begun sleeping in a separate room, not because he had stopped loving her, because he did not know what would happen in the night. She might attack him during a manic episode, as she had done before. She might stop breathing as the tuberculosis threatened. He stopped sleeping beside the woman he loved because the night had become a country in which neither of them was safe. There were further miscarriages around 1956. Each one was a fresh wound. Each triggered a fresh collapse. Each laid another stone in the wall rising between them. Joan Plowright entered the story in 1957. She was 28, an actress of considerable talent, performing in Olivier's productions at the Royal Court Theatre. She was not dazzling. She was not fragile. She was not made of porcelain, but of clay, solid, warm, without cracks. Olivier, after 20 years on a volcano, wanted earth beneath his feet. He found it. The affair developed slowly, rehearsals in 57 and 58, a growing closeness that Olivier fought against with diminishing conviction. By 1959, the relationship had become physical. Vivien found out. Her reaction was not what anyone expected. Not hysteria, not rage, a glacial calm. "I knew this would happen," she said. "I am surprised it took so long." Inside, the devastation was total. Another hospitalization followed. Through friends, she is reported to have said of Playwright, a remark that no biographer has been able to verify, but that everyone who knew Vivien agreed sounded exactly like her. "Look after him. He doesn't know how to do it himself." The divorce was finalized in December of 1960. The formal grounds were Olivier's adultery. He took the blame upon himself, as the law required to protect her reputation. She did not want the divorce. She hoped until the very end that he would return. Her letters from this period, partially published in Vivien Leigh, letters, edited by Kendra Bean in 2013, are restrained, dignified, and saturated with love. "I know you are tired of me. I am tired of myself. But I am not tired of loving you. It is the only thing of which I am still certain." Olivier married Playwright on the 17th of March, 1961. They had 3 children. The marriage lasted until his death. After the divorce, he and Vivien remained in contact, not close but respectful. He helped her financially. She never said a single unkind word about him in public. Not once. Every biographer confirms this. It was, perhaps, the most remarkable performance of her life, and the one for which she received no award. For 20 years she had been Mrs. Laurence Olivier. Her identity had been woven into his like thread into cloth. Now, at 46, she stood alone. 2 Academy Awards. Chronic tuberculosis, a disorder for which no effective treatment existed. An empty flat on Eaton Square. And a mirror in the hallway that no longer had anyone to reflect for. At 46, she had every reason to retreat. Any screenwriter would have written the closing credits here. Vivien Leigh did not perform from other people's scripts. John Merivale was not a volcano. He was not a genius. He was something rarer, a man who understood exactly what he was walking into and walked in anyway. Canadian-born, British-trained, an actor of solid talent and quiet temperament, he had known Vivien for years and stepped forward after the divorce with the unhurried certainty of someone who has weighed the cost and accepted it. He knew about the bipolar disorder. He knew about the tuberculosis. He knew about the episodes, the screaming, the amnesia, the nights when she became someone else entirely, and the mornings when she returned, bewildered and ashamed. He knew all of this, and he stayed. Not out of heroism, not out of pity. Out of something simpler and more durable than either. He loved her, and he believed that love, even when it cannot cure, can accompany. They never married. She told him, with the wry pragmatism of a woman who has learned from experience, 2 marriages is quite enough. He did not press the matter. He moved into her life with the discretion of a man who knows that the previous tenant was Laurence Olivier, and that comparisons, however unfair, are inevitable. His diary, partially published after his death, offers glimpses of their daily existence that are more revealing than any biography. One entry, undated but believed to be from 1961, reads, "A bad day today. She did not recognize me this morning. By lunchtime she was herself again. We drank tea and discussed Chekhov, as though the morning had not happened. I have learned to live in 2 realities." He accompanied her on a world tour in 1961 and 62, a production of Duel of Angels by Jean Giraudoux. When the episodes struck on the road, he managed them with a competence born of practice. He would quietly escort her back to the hotel, apologize to the organizers, sit beside her until the storm passed. No drama, no complaints, no interviews afterwards describing his sacrifice. He simply did what needed to be done, and then they carried on. In 1961, she appeared in The Roman Spring of Mrs. Stone, a film adapted from a novella by Tennessee Williams. Her co-star was Warren Beatty, 30 years younger, playing a Roman gigolo who preys on a fading actress. At 47, she was playing a woman watching her beauty leave. She played it without vanity, without disguise, and the critics, who had spent 2 decades calling her merely lovely, sat up and noticed. But the center of this period, the scene that captures everything about who Vivien Leigh was in her final years, took place not on a film set but on a Broadway stage in the spring of 1963. The show was Tovarich, a musical based on a French play about Russian aristocrats reduced to working as servants in Paris. It was not the kind of material that anyone associated with Vivien Leigh, a musical comedy, light and frothy, requiring singing and dancing from an actress known for Shakespeare and Williams. The casting seemed eccentric. It proved to be inspired. 5 minutes before curtain on opening night, the stage manager knocked on her dressing room door. 2 minutes, Miss Leigh. There was no response. He knocked again. The dresser opened the door a crack and shook her head. Inside, Vivien sat before the mirror, the working mirror, the one surrounded by bare bulbs, the mirror that every actress faces before every performance. She was weeping. Not the controlled, photogenic tears of a screen actress, but the raw, convulsive sobs of a woman who did not know where she was. The dresser was in a state of near panic. The stage manager looked at his watch. The orchestra was playing the overture. 1,200 people were settling into their seats. Then something happened. She stopped crying. She looked at herself. Something shifted behind her eyes, a switch thrown, a circuit completed, a door closing on one room and opening onto another. She stood. She wiped her face. She adjusted her costume. She walked to the wings. She gave a flawless performance. The audience rose to their feet at the curtain call. The reviews the following morning were ecstatic. A colleague, quoted by Strachan, said, "What she did that night was not acting. It was something beyond the reach of ordinary human capability." She won the Tony Award for Best Actress in a Musical, a dramatic actress, celebrated for tragedy, honored for a musical comedy. It was the kind of contradiction that her entire career had been built upon. The world kept trying to put her in one box, and she kept climbing out of it. The last film came in 1965. Ship of Fools, directed by Stanley Kramer, was an ensemble piece set aboard an ocean liner in the 1930s, a floating microcosm of a world drifting towards catastrophe. The cast included Simone Signoret, Oscar Werner, and José Ferrer. Vivien played Mary Treadwell, a bitter, aging divorcee clinging to the remnants of her attractiveness. She was thin by then. The tuberculosis had carved hollows beneath her cheekbones that no amount of makeup could entirely disguise. But the green eyes were unchanged, the same eyes that had stopped Selznick in his tracks on a burning backlot 27 years earlier. Kramer would later recall a moment during filming that stayed with him long after the production wrapped. She was sitting by the rail of the ship, looking out at the water, just sitting, not reading, not talking to anyone. I wanted to approach her, but something stopped me. She looked as though she were saying goodbye, not to anyone in particular, to everything. There had been talk of other projects, adaptations, revivals, but nothing had been signed. It was her final screen appearance. Suzanne had grown up with her father. The childhood resentment, the sense of having been chosen against, of being the daughter left behind, had softened over the years into something more complicated than anger and more generous than forgiveness. She married. She had a son, Neville. Suzanne brought the boy to visit on Sundays. Vivien taught him card games and read him the same fairy tales Gertrude had once read to her. It was not atonement. It was something quieter, a second chance at a relationship she had failed the first time. Suzanne was present in the final months. She had forgiven her mother, not in a single dramatic moment of reconciliation, but gradually, the way dawn forgives the night, by simply arriving. In the spring of 1967, the tuberculosis returned. She knew. The doctors told her what she already understood. Her lungs, ravaged by decades of smoking and repeated infection, could not sustain another assault. She was preparing a new role, Edward Albee's A Delicate Balance, a play about a household in which the veneer of civilization is peeled away to reveal the terror beneath. The title proved to be a diagnosis. She would never perform it. Her last public appearance was at the theatre in May of 1967. She was gaunt but immaculately dressed, the deportment drilled into her by the nuns of Roehampton half a century earlier still holding, still governing the way she entered a room. Those who saw her that evening said afterwards that she knew. She knew it was the end, and she wanted the end to be elegant. Stand straight. Do not smile until you have finished. She stood straight. She did not smile. Merivale was with her, but he was also working, performing in a play of his own, torn between the stage and the woman he loved, unable to abandon either. He came home each night and sat with her. They talked about the garden at Tickeridge Mill, about the Albee play, about nothing of consequence, which was, by then, the most precious kind of conversation. They did not talk about what was coming. They did not need to. The night of the 7th of July, 1967. Eaton Square, number 54, Belgravia, London. Merivale left for the theatre in the early evening. She was reading, propped up in bed, a book open on her lap. She told him she felt well. He kissed her and left. What happened next has been reconstructed from the accounts of those who arrived afterwards and from the medical evidence. Sometime during the night, the exact hour is uncertain, Edwards places it before midnight on the 7th, Strachan closer to 1 o'clock on the 8th, she began to cough. She rose from the bed. She walked towards the bathroom or perhaps the kitchen. She fell. The tuberculosis had filled her lungs with fluid. She could not breathe. She tried to stand. She could not. She died on the floor of her flat beside the bed, alone. She was 53 years old. Whether she was already dead when Merivale returned, or whether she died in the minutes before he opened the door, no one will ever know. He found her on the floor. He checked for a pulse. There was none. He sat beside her for a time, how long he never said. Then he picked up the telephone. He called Olivier first. Not Suzanne, not friends, not the doctor. Olivier, 20 years after the divorce, 7 years after the marriage ended, and the first call was still to him. It said more about the marriage than any memoir ever written. Olivier came to Eaton Square. He stood over the body of the woman he had loved for 30 years, loved and failed, and fled from and never stopped thinking about. He stood there for several minutes without speaking. Then he said, not to her, not to Merivale, not to himself, perhaps to no one at all, two words that contained everything and resolved nothing. Beautiful, even now. And then silence. The theatres of the West End extinguished their lights for 1 hour. It was the traditional tribute, reserved for the greatest of the profession. The marquees went dark along Shaftesbury Avenue, along the Strand, along St. Martin's Lane. For 60 minutes, the stages on which he had triumphed and suffered stood in darkness. And then the lights came back on, and the evening performances began, because the theatre does not stop for anyone, not even for Vivien Leigh. She was cremated. Her ashes were scattered over the lake at Tickeridge Mill in East Sussex, the country house she had bought after the divorce. Her place, not theirs, hers. Olivier did not attend the scattering. He sent pink roses. They had been her favourite. In the flat on Eaton Square, a mirror remained in the hallway. She had passed it every day for 7 years. Now it reflected an empty corridor. She had never seen in it what the rest of the world saw. The world saw perfection. She saw an unfinished draft, a face where there should have been a soul. Perhaps, in the end, that was the source of her greatness, the refusal to surrender to the reflection. The insistence, maintained across 53 years and 2 Academy Awards and 1 devastating illness, that there was something more important than being looked at. The tragedy was that the world took so long to agree. The lights came back on. The programs were printed for the next evening's performances. The obituaries ran in every newspaper in the English-speaking world, and in a good many beyond it. The words were generous, as obituaries tend to be, and they were inadequate, as obituaries always are when the subject is someone whose life resisted summary. The most beautiful actress of her generation, wrote the Times. A talent eclipsed by tragedy, wrote the New York Times. Both were true. Neither was sufficient. The people she left behind carried her differently, the way survivors of the same shipwreck carry different fragments of the vessel. A plank, a rope, a memory of the sound the hull made when it broke. Peter Finch became a global star. In 1976, he played Howard Beale in Network, the unhinged television anchor who commands his viewers to open their windows and scream that they are mad as hell and not going to take it any more. It was the performance of his life. He did not live to collect the reward. On the 14th of January, 1977, at the age of 60, he suffered a massive heart attack in the lobby of the Beverly Hills Hotel. He died before the ambulance arrived. The Academy Award, the first ever given posthumously to an actor, was accepted on his behalf by his widow, Eletha. He spoke of Vivien rarely. When interviewers raised the subject, he deflected with the practiced ease of a man who has rehearsed his evasions. On one occasion, pressed by a persistent journalist, he said only, "She was the most extraordinary person I ever knew. I was not equal to her. Very few people were." He did not elaborate. He did not need to. John Merivale continued to act. He appeared on stage and in television throughout the 1970s and 80s. Solid, dependable work that earned respect without attracting headlines. He died on the 6th of February, 1990, at the age of 72. He gave very few interviews about her, and those he gave were brief and marked by a courtesy that bordered on reticence. He did not trade on the association. He did not write a memoir. He did not sell his story to the tabloids. He had loved her, and he had been there at the end, and he considered that a private matter. In an age of public confession, his silence was its own kind of eloquence. Laurence Olivier outlived Vivien by 22 years. In 1970, he became Baron Olivier, the first actor to receive a peerage. He continued to work with a ferocity that suggested he was running from something, though what that something was he never quite said. He married Joan Plowright. They had 3 children, Richard, Tamsin, and Julie Kate. The marriage was stable, warm, and grounded in a mutual respect that bore no resemblance to the incandescent, destructive passion of his years with Vivien. Plowright gave him what Vivien could not: peace. Whether peace was what he truly wanted or merely what he needed is a question that his memoirs raise without answering. He never stopped speaking about Vivien. In interviews, in his autobiography, in private conversations reported by friends, she surfaced again and again, not as a ghost, but as a presence, vivid and unresolved. He spoke of her with love. He spoke of her with guilt. He spoke of her with the bewildered admiration of a man who spent 20 years beside a phenomenon he could neither control nor abandon. "I loved her," he wrote. "I failed her. I do not know which came first, or whether they were the same thing." He died on the 11th of July, 1989. He was 82. Westminster Abbey opened Poets' Corner for his ashes, the only actor ever so honoured. But the words he had written about Vivien outlived every honour the Abbey could bestow. At the memorial service, Plowright sat in the front pew. Somewhere in the congregation, unnoticed, sat people who remembered a different wife, a different era, a different Olivier, the young man who had stood on a burning back lot in Hollywood and watched a woman walk towards him through the flames. Kenneth Tynan, the most influential theatre critic in Britain at the time, the man whose reviews could close a show overnight, had once declared that Vivien Leigh was not quite a great actress, that she lacked the volcanic power required for the supreme classical roles. He later recanted. He admitted, in a passage that cost him considerable professional pride, that he had been wrong, that he had mistaken control for coldness, precision for limitation, discipline for the absence of fire. By the time he said this, it was too late for it to matter to her. It mattered, perhaps, to the historical record. Today, the critical consensus holds that she was one of the finest actresses of the 20th century, not despite the illness but alongside it, the two intertwined so completely that to separate the artist from the affliction would be to misunderstand both. And then there was Herbert Lee Homan. He is the figure most easily overlooked in this story, the first husband, the man she left, the barrister who wanted a conventional wife and received instead a force of nature that he could neither contain nor comprehend. After the divorce, he retreated from public life with the thoroughness of a man who has no desire to be part of a narrative he did not choose. He lived alone. He practiced law. He did not remarry. He did not give interviews. He did not write letters to the newspapers when the biographies were published. He did not correct the record when journalists described him as dull or conventional or simply as the man Vivien Leigh married before she met the love of her life. He absorbed these characterizations with the same stoic silence with which he had absorbed the loss of his wife, and he said nothing. He raised Suzanne. He gave her the ordinary, stable childhood that Vivien could not. And when Suzanne grew up and asked him about her mother, as she must have done, as any child would, he answered without bitterness, without drama, with the quiet accuracy of a barrister presenting facts to a jury. After his death, Suzanne found the photographs. They were in a drawer of his desk, not displayed on a mantelpiece, not framed on a wall, but kept in a place that was private and deliberate. Photographs of Vivien, dozens of them, from the early years before Olivier, before Hollywood, before the illness and the fame and the destruction. Photographs of a young woman with green eyes and a smile that had not yet learned to perform. They were arranged neatly, carefully, as though someone had taken them out and looked at them many times and always put them back in the same order. The man she had left first had kept her face the longest. It is a detail that no screenwriter would dare to invent, because it is too perfectly shaped, too symmetrical, too much like the ending of a film. But it is not the ending of a film. It is the ending of a life, several lives, and life, unlike cinema, does not arrange its ironies for dramatic effect. It simply produces them without comment and leaves the audience to make of them what they will. She wanted the world to see an actress. The world saw a beauty. She wanted Lady Macbeth. They gave her Scarlet. She wanted to be judged by the work. They judged her by the face, and then by the illness, and then by the scandal, and then, when it was too late, by the work after all. But the world changed. Slowly, over decades, through the patient labor of biographers and the fading of prejudice and the growing understanding of mental illness as disease rather than deficiency, the world began to see what she had seen from the beginning, not the face, the fire behind it. Every mirror lies. It shows us the surface and calls it the truth. Vivien Leigh knew this at 14, standing in a corridor in a French convent, and she knew it at 53, lying on the floor of a flat in Belgravia. The distance between those two moments, 40 years of genius and grief and love and loss, is the distance between a girl who suspected the mirror was wrong and a woman who proved it. The theatres are lit again tonight. The programmes have been printed. The curtain will rise at 7:30, as it always does, and the actors will step into the light, as they always have, and the audience will watch and judge and applaud and forget. But somewhere in the darkness beyond the footlights, in the space between the performance and the person, there remains a question that Vivien Leigh asked with her life and never quite answered with her death. What is more frightening, when the world cannot see who you truly are, or when you cannot see it yourself? She kept it, and she took it with her, and the lake at Tickeridge Mill keeps it still.